It is the 6th anniversary of the popular uprising in Bahrain against the Al Khalifa rulers, and clashes have erupted between Bahraini regime forces and protesters. Protests have been on and off for the past 6 years, with the regime using all of its force to crush the protest. In this debate, we'll discuss Bahrain's revolution, the reasons why it has continued despite the repression, and the role that the regime's backers, namely the US and UK, are playing.
These are the streets of Bahrain in 2011 when massive pro-democracy protests erupted in the Persian Gulf island nation. The rallies took place against the backdrop of similar demonstrations in several other Arab countries aimed at toppling the corrupt regimes. Bahrain's ruling Al Khalifa family, however, resorted to any means to crush the peaceful protests. Now, 6 years down the line, Bahrainis continue with their protests for freedom and democracy. Will the nightmare of Bahrainis ever come to an end? Since 2011, the Saudi-backed regime has been infuriating people with its harsh actions and decisions. Continuing their policies, authorities detained the leader of then-main opposition party Al-Wafaq, Sheikh Ali Salman. They later dissolved the party itself. More recently, the Bahraini rulers added fuel to the fire by revoking the citizenship of the prominent Shia cleric Sheikh Isa Qassem. The stateless cleric has been under house arrest in the past month. Manama accused both Salman and Qassem of inciting hatred against the government. Brutal suppression is yet another tactic the Bahraini regime has applied so far to silence dissenting voices. In one of the most recent cases, Manama executed 3 men over carrying out an alleged attack on policemen in 2014. Amnesty International condemned the move, saying the men were killed after an unfair trial and despite their claims that they had been tortured in custody to confess.
We have seen in recent days executions and also assassinations, as we see on land and also in sea. We also saw major crackdown on the activists. In the last few days, hundreds of people were arrested in order to preempt the anniversary. However, the people are adamant and insistent that they will continue their struggle 6 years on, and the revolution is as strong as ever, despite the enormous military presence and security presence in the streets.
Bahrain and its rulers have been enjoying an all-out support from Saudi Arabia. In 2011, Riyadh played an important role in suppressing anti-Manama protests by sending some 1,000 troops and armored vehicles. The United Arab Emirates also sent hundreds of troops to help Bahraini police deal with the nationwide protests. Prominent rights groups including Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch have already been constantly critical of Bahrain over its harsh treatment of its own citizens. But all the calls have fallen on deaf ears so far. Probably Manama is emboldened to go ahead with its heavy-handed tactic because of unrelenting support it enjoys from the West, including the United States, which has its 5th fleet in Bahrain, and the UK, which has its Royal Naval base there. People in Bahrain, however, seem to be steadfast in their call for democracy and freedom.
Our guest joining us for this edition of the debate, author and former U.S. diplomat Michael Springman, joins us from Washington. And we have political analyst Jad Markadeh, who joins us from Beirut. Gentlemen, welcome. I'd like to start with you, Michael Springman. We're looking at an uprising revolution that has been going on now for 6 years. At the end of that report, the U.S. role was highlighted. How would you assess U.S.'s role when it comes to the regime there and, of course, the way that the crackdown has occurred on these peaceful protests?
Well, the United States is ignoring the crackdown on the peaceful protests. Instead, it is supporting a brutally repressive government, I think simply because it's very convenient to have Manama as the base for the U.S. 5th Fleet. And the 5th Fleet is there only because the Americans have this crazy idea that Iran is a threat to all of the countries in the region. Iran hasn't invaded anybody in the last 2 centuries, whereas the United States, Great Britain, and a number of other countries seem to make a process of invading and subjugating countries with which they are not in agreement.
Jad Markadeh,
I think that in the case of
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, okay, sure. I think in the case of Bahrain, the country would not exist unless the United States Fifth Fleet were there. I mean, they get tourism from Saudi Arabia. They come over and they drink and they carouse and whatever. But I don't think that would make up for the loss of oil revenues, the high jobless rate, and the fact that the Bahraini government is cutting back subsidies because of its huge budgetary deficits. I think it's a country on the brink of collapse, and it's propped up only by the United States and by the United Kingdom. And this has got to change. These countries are using the country for their own purposes and ignoring the legitimate efforts of the inhabitants to have democratic rights, a limited government, just like most people in the world are aspiring to or have already. The United States and Great Britain talk a great deal about freedom and civil rights and human rights and democracy and constitutional limited government. But when it comes to places like Bahrain, those words don't apply anymore, and those words don't exist.
Well, John Marcotte, based on what Michael Springman there said, do you agree if it wasn't for the UK and the US that Bahrain, well, would be on a verge of collapse? Or is it because of Saudi Arabia that Bahrain is still there?
Neither way. Bahrain has been under attack for the last 35 years from governments in the region. There was a coup d'etat in 1981. I was there myself at the time, so I know what I'm talking about. There has been deliberate attempt to overthrow the kingdom of Bahrain, the king and so on, which have been ruling the Bahrain for the last 300 years. Now, if you say that this is fine, then everything else is open to discussion. No, I think Bahrain is an island which had at some point in time its claim to fame, so to speak. When Bahrain was attacked in 2011, there is what you call a common defense pact amongst the GCC countries, and they called upon this common defense pact, and this is why you had UAE and Saudi troops coming in to save one of their brothers who is part of this pact. So it is pretty much like the Warsaw Pact at the time, or NATO today, or what have you. When you say Saudi Arabia came and saved Bahrain, no. Saudi Arabia will go and save the UAE or Qatar or whatever, and the others will come to save Saudi Arabia whenever. So it was a common defense pact. Now Bahrain is under attack. It is under attack internally, and it must defend itself. Because when people have legitimate rights, they have legitimate rights, and nobody's denying that. But when people who have legitimate rights are supported by foreign powers with arms and ammunitions and kill people in the streets, including policemen, like these 3 people who were executed a week ago, who have killed policemen in Bahrain, and this is in the report of Amnesty International, as you mentioned. It is clear in the report that they have killed policemen. It was not alleged at all. When people go to this length, I know for a fact that many countries in the area would go much further than Bahrain did.
Okay.
In terms of tear gas or rubber bullets and stuff like that. Other people have used real live ammunition.
All right. Let's put some of the things Michael Springman that Jad Marcotte there said let's put it into context. First of all, Michael Springman, Jad Marcotte talks about Bahrain being under attack in 2011. There was an uprising. People were asking for the legitimate rights. Does that constitute an attack?
Exactly. No, indeed, it does not. The people simply want their rights. They were peacefully protesting, and it was the Bahraini government with the repressive Saudi monarchy troops and those of the UAE that went in and repressed them, suppressed them, shot, killed people, tortured people, arrested people. And, you know, if they had any arms, they would surely have used them on the Saudis and the Bahrainis and on the Emiratis. It's only going to be a matter of time before the people realize that they're going to need some help from someplace and blow up the causeway, the 25-kilometer link to Saudi Arabia, and they're going to start attacking the American base of Manama. They can see now, I think, after 6 years of protesting, that it's getting them nowhere, and they're going to have to take violence into their own hands, just like the Americans did in the revolution against the United Kingdom in the 18th century. Peaceful protests are not working, and all it does is give the repressive government troops a chance to use birdshot, which is fine for birds at 50 meters, but deadly at close up, stun grenades, tear gas, torture, and rubber bullets. This is not democracy. This is not an attack by peaceful demonstrators. This is an attack on peaceful demonstrators.
Okay. Jihad Markare, before I get a reaction from you, what Michael Springman said there is backed in terms of the instances to have happened in 2011 and forward by the Bassiouni report, in which he confirmed that the criminal justice system is a farce. Those accused had confessions tortured out of them, in reference to the 3 that you say were executed for killing cops. They confessed because they were under torture. He confirmed that more than a dozen civilians were killed by security forces back then, but he said thousands more were dismissed from their jobs in university places because of their association with protests. And that when it comes to Iran, there was no indication that Iran was responsible for any of these protests that were going on. Do you agree with the Bassiouni report, Jihad Markare?
Which report, sir?
The report back in 2011, when the protests broke out, and then you had a report come out by Judge Bassiouni.
The report back in 2011, the report back in 2011 does not deal with the incidents that happened in 2014, for which the 3 people have been condemned. So let's get things straight on this point.
I was making a comparison. I'm sorry. I was making a comparison only.
Okay. With regards to 2011, there has been an attempt to overthrow the Bahraini government, and it was an attempt to overthrow it by force, and by force of arms, and it was, unfortunately, supported by Iran, since you mentioned it. I tried to avoid mentioning Iran before, but Iran did support by force, providing ammunition, providing weapons, providing trainings, even by Hezbollah people, in Bahrain and in Lebanon and elsewhere, training those forces to overthrow the Bahraini government. So when the Bahraini government called upon the Common Defense Pact, they were right to do it. What's the point of a defense pact if you do not call on it if you're under attack?
I'm quite confused, Jihad Markare, when you repeat the fact that Bahrain is under attack. Do you call peaceful protest or protest for people wanting their rights, that they're attacking the government or they're attacking security forces? I mean, I don't quite understand that.
It depends how you protest to ask for your rights. If you ask for your rights with peaceful demonstration, that's something. If you are training in terrorist camps with weapons and ammunition and try to go through violence, that is something totally different. It's not peaceful demonstrations for your rights anymore. It is a blatant attempt to overthrow the legitimate government of Bahrain.
So before I move on to you, Michael Springman, Jihad Markare, do you not think that there's a problem in Bahrain? Do you think the approach taken by the regime, now 6 years old in the making, is the right approach?
Wait a second. I never said there is no problem in Bahrain. I have lived in Bahrain myself, so I know what I'm talking about. There is a problem in Bahrain. Okay? I'm not saying there is no problem in Bahrain. All I'm saying is attempts to use the problem in Bahrain by military means and military support and military training, this is unacceptable in my opinion.
Okay, let's talk about some of the countries, a couple of the countries, Michael Springman, the U.S. and the U.K. We recently witnessed how the U.K. Prime Minister visited Bahrain and was the first woman to make a speech there at the GCC Council of the Persian Gulf countries. And of course, there were, I think, up to $10 billion of arms were signed regarding all of the countries. Now, instances like that, where military products are being sold to Bahrain, doesn't that give the regime there a feeling like they have a free hand to do what they want when it comes to dealing with the Bahrainis?
Yes, it does. Indeed, the British are violating their own laws. The British law says that you're not allowed to export weapons to countries that will use them in violation of international humanitarian law, which is certainly what the Bahraini government, the illegitimate Bahraini government, is doing. Hundreds of thousands of people protesting for 6 years and getting nowhere, I think, is an exercise in frustration. And surely Theresa May, the UK Prime Minister, should be able to see this. She should say, we want to see Bahrain have a constitutional monarchical government just like we have here at home. And they're ignored because the Bahrainis are quite happy knowing that they are an export market for British weapons. They are very secure. They are, in fact, importing mercenaries from Syria and from Pakistan to flesh out their armed forces, which are trained by the British. There, in fact, was a Belfast company that trained the Bahraini security forces, the ones that use torture. So it's something beyond belief that the British cannot see what is happening before their very eyes, and they do not see where their interests are. They're going to thoroughly antagonize every man, woman, and child in Bahrain that is not connected to the illegitimate government. And what's going to happen when the Al Khalifa family is finally overthrown in a bloody revolution? The British and the Americans are suddenly going to lose their bases there, and they're going to be out of circulation, and it's going to cost them more in the long run than if they simply pressure the Bahraini government to do what the people want. Give them a limited government, give them a constitution, and do something about the overreaching, unparalleled executive powers of the king.
That sounds like a solution. Jad Markadeh, does it sound like a good solution in your eyes?
Well, no, I'm sorry, because the gentleman seems to think that the Bahraini population is 100% Shia. In fact, it is not. It is 2/3 Shia, a little bit more than a half Shia, and the rest are Sunnis. So when you say every single woman and child and so on, how about the others who support the legal government of Bahrain? I mean, are you ignoring them? Or are they supposed to agree to whatever you impose on them by the force of arms? So, no, I don't agree. On the other hand, Theresa May, when she was in the Gulf at the GCC summit in Bahrain, was very clear to say that the security of Bahrain and the security of the GCC is part of the security of the UK. This is something, a very strong statement that she made, which is destined to all those who are trying to overthrow governments in the area, or in the GCC, I mean, or to try to make trouble in the area. It is a red line for the UK, it is a red line for the US, and the others, all the other population in the area have to fall in line.
Okay, let's, Michael Springman, talk about the demographics. The idea of sectarianism, when the so-called Arab Spring hit the region, basically became inflamed. But this is not about that. There have even been Sunnis, if we want to talk about how, if we want to break down by religion sect, Sunnis have also been under the crackdown by the regime. This is about people wanting their rights. And this narrative, by many accounts, is wrong to say that this is a Sunni-Shia thing. These people are being stripped of their rights. One of their most famous clerics has been stripped of his citizenship, Sheikh Isa Ghassam. And he's a very well-respected cleric there on the island. You would think after 6 years, instead of going at the population there, that there would be doors opened up for some kind of a diplomacy or some kind of talks. Why does the regime opt not to do that?
Well, the regime does this because they know they've got the backing of the United States and the United Kingdom, and they can pretend to defend the sceptred isle 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000 miles away when Great Britain is not under attack by anybody. I think this business of the Sunni-Shia split is a carefully constructed thing aimed at convincing people who know nothing about the Arab world or Islam that there is some kind of a giant split, and there are fanatics and there are wonderful people like the Sunni, and that's not the case. The Sunni don't have any rights in Bahrain either. There was a journalist who wrote extensively about this, and she says that basically the problem in Bahrain is not religion, but the fact that nobody has any rights except the government and people closely connected to the government. And the Sunni have problems in Bahrain, just as the Shia do, because if they want democracy, if they want freedom, they're on the outs, and they will wait forever to get a house or a loan from the government to buy a house.
Okay, unfortunately, we're fresh out of time, but I do thank you for the comments. Let me thank our guest, author and former U.S. diplomat Michael Springman from Washington, and thank you, Jihad Markadeh, political analyst from Beirut. Thanks so much for tuning in to another edition of The Debate. From me, Kaveh Takwa, and the entire team in the capital, Tehran, it's goodbye.